Welcome to the Press On podcast, where we are attempting to navigate cultural confusion from an eternal perspective, or something like that. We are still working on all of this tagline and title and all of that, but it doesn't matter. Today we have a Q&A session from the Lakelight Institute with Dr. Vincent Bacote. It was moderated by Ben Dockery, and after the presentation by Dr. Bacote, Ben asked questions to both of us. Dr. Bacote is a professor of theology at Wheaton College. He is also the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics at Wheaton. He's the author of numerous books, including, most recently, Reckoning with Race, Performing the Good News in Search of a Better Evangelical Theology. The book that got my attention was The Political Disciple, A Theology of Public Life. Dr. Bacote is a regular columnist for Comment magazine and contributes to other magazines such as Books and Culture, Christianity Today, Think Christian, Regeneration Quarterly, and a number of academic journals such as the Christian Scholars Review and the Journal for Christian Theological Research. Dr. Bacote is a member of ETS, that's the Evangelical Theological Society, and the Society for Christian Ethics. He and his family live in Chicago. So the topic is faith and politics, not in the uniquely partisan perspective of that, which is so ever present as we approach this upcoming midterm election. I'm not against that. I care about that to some extent. It's all good theater, and but as I said last week in the sermon, politics is downstream from what matters most. I actually said, look, I will grant you, let's just imagine in a thought experiment, that I'm going to grant you that you win every election. You get your candidate in every seat, and furthermore, you get every judge that you want, and you get every law passed that you want, and this happens for the next 20 years. I said, even if that's true, the world is still profoundly broken. We still have all kinds of problems. I'm not saying politics doesn't matter, it does. I think good laws matter a lot. I am in favor of that. But I just think that we have invested the state and invested politics with too much power or too much hope right now. We're trying to provide political solutions to some spiritual issues, and that's not going to work. So last night I was downtown with some friends. There's a news, sort of a startup news agency, and I have been tracking with them for a little while, and they were holding sort of an open house downtown, and so they invited anyone who was listening to come down to the city. It was at a bar. There was like 250 of us that showed up for 3 to 4 hour open house that included an hour of Q&A with them. And I enjoy these things. I enjoy these conversations, and I enjoy hearing thoughtful journalists and other people trying to figure out how to help us navigate this particular moment. And for that matter, I have preached on politics, I guess 5 times. So I've been the senior pastor for just over 20 years, and every presidential election cycle, in the summer before the November election, I have done a series, sometimes just 2 sermons, but at least 2, sometimes I've done 4 or 5, in which I've tried to frame things biblically and tried to say, look, what does the Bible have to say about the role of government? What are the first primary issues? Looking at Romans 13, looking at Scripture and looking at 2,000 years of Christians trying to understand how to be citizens of 2 kingdoms, a citizen of God and the citizen of man. So in the first sermon that I did, I just very provocatively, I was, of course, young and naive, and I entitled the sermon, "Is Jesus a Democrat or a Republican?" And then actually I had announced that I was going to preach on that, and attendance was remarkably up that next Sunday. And I realized I was going to disappoint people because I was not going to give a single word answer to that question. I was going to say, look, there are issues and orientations that people bring to this. So the Democrats are obviously going to say that Jesus is a good Chicago Democrat, voting early, maybe not voting often, but they're going to frame things around issues of the concern for the poor and issues around justice. And then the Republicans, again, this is just sort of classically stated, the Republicans are going to be concerned about a different set of moral issues. They're going to hone in more around issues of life, abortion, maybe euthanasia, a bunch of sexual issues. And what both sides are, back then, this is 20 years ago, I'd say what is true is that for the most part, both sides are going to say, yes, we need to care for the poor. They're just going to argue over some pretty fundamentally different approaches to what that looks like. How do we best care for the poor? With one side saying this is all about taxes to redistribute wealth, and we've got to provide, the government needs to provide a safety net. And the other side saying, no, we need to let the market work, we need to let charity work. Very different approach to saying, how do we care for the poor? That day is past a little bit. There's a little bit sharper division in terms of what the overall objective goal or what it looks like to those on the left and the right to have a society that is thriving. Whether they look backwards and say those were better days or those were horrible days, they look forward and say, yes, everything's getting better or everything's getting worse. So this is a contentious topic. I have engaged in it from time to time. I was thankful for the opportunity to have Dr. Bacote here, who has obviously thought a lot about this. Again, he is a professor of theology, but his particular area of focus has been around politics. And so it's a discussion. I think it's 45 minutes long, and we're exploring government. We're exploring politics. We're exploring what it looks like to think about these things. Again, not in a up to the moment, partisan, breaking news kind of way, but in a little bit more reflective way of what it looks like to be a faithful disciple in a political moment. So, hope this is helpful to you. Enjoy.
As we get started here, Dr. Bacote, first, thank you for your remarks and for setting the stage for this conversation. I want to give people the chance. Most people here probably know a little bit about our senior pastor, Mike Woodruff, but to get a chance to know you better, so both of you better, a series of questions here. First, so let's start in 2016 and decide who both of you voted for in that. Don't we want to know the answer to that? Just kidding. How did you get interested? Actually, I have one more remark. Some of you are probably here tonight. I want to go ahead and maybe disappoint you in the type of conversation you may be hoping we're going to have. You made this great, I wrote it down, comment when you started, trailers for horror movies, like the radio ads and TV ads that are on right now. That was a great comment. We're not going down that trail. We're not going to try to scare you to say if you vote for Pritzker, your kids are not going to be safe. And if you don't vote for Pritzker, then they're going to do something awful with abortion and take away all your rights in the worst case scenario. I mean, those things are being said over and over and over. That's not necessarily the type of conversation we are attempting to have here tonight. When we talk about like timeless wisdom for modern life, we're really looking for principles from God in Scripture that are guiding a broader set of conversations that we can have. So there are times and places maybe for those, but I want to go ahead and disappoint a couple of you just in case you thought we were going down that road. But how did you get interested, do want to get to know you a little bit, in this conversation, in this space? What led you? I know you did a PhD at Drew, you were at Trinity for MDiv before that, but how did you get interested in this conversation overall?
Because I've been a culture-affirming Christian for a long time, and as I put it in Political Disciple, it's basically because I wanted to be a rock and roll star, is really the reason why. In the sense that it was a fantasy anyway. And I was the guy.
So you are a musician?
I play at electric bass, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think we have one of those around here.
We'll find one.
Yeah, it's in my, you don't want that. It wouldn't be great. Remember, plays that. But that was the gateway into the larger reality of the public, because I had an intuition that it was proper to participate in the larger culture, that you could appreciate music other than classical, and and that it was okay for a Christian to do that, and that you could be discerning about. I mean, I didn't have the language then, but the way I would say it is that if I wanted to listen to Motley Crue, it didn't mean I wanted to be like Motley Crue, right? I could appreciate their music without wanting to say, how sleazy can I be, right? I mean, that wasn't at all. I mean, I had no desire to be like them, but I liked, all these bands, and this was a cause of some conversation in my Bible study while I was in college.
Really? So those of you who love rock and roll, it might lead you to politics one day, right? And
you understanding
theology
you never
and
know.
PhD work.
Yeah.
So one of the things you said at the very beginning was that you talked about the primary allegiance, and that it seems to me that in today's world that many people, their primary allegiance has become political in nature in some kind. They're finding their identity in politics. And Mike, I'm going to give the same question to you here, but is that fair to say that is on the rise, that politics has more of a defining nature on who people understand that they are? Is that growing in our day? And if so, maybe why is that? Why do you see that as a trend?
I think ultimately what it is there is some growth in that, and it's where political identities, and sometimes other identities that may have a political component attached to them, they're becoming the thing. And so and I think also belonging, meaning, and purpose in a changing world where people aren't sure where this changing world is going. And so there's something about the way that for some people it's giving them something to hook onto. And I think on top of that, there are ways in which other forms of belonging have been eroded by just various winds of culture. And so I think that the political piece has been part of that for sure, in terms of giving people a sense of here's something that I can really, really care about. I think it's also, to some degree, part of people's identity because there are things in terms of our life and society that people care about, and people have been told in differing ways, in different contexts, here's how you should care, here are the things that you should care about. And I think it just expanded and took on an oversized commitment. And then the last thing I would say about that is that I think part of the reason that it's taken on the identity for some people that it has is that their formation as Christians has not helped them to understand why they should care about politics. It's more like an osmosis type of thing. Well, this is political reality, and there are these issues, and I really care about them, and I've been told as a Christian I really should care about them. And for some people, I truly care about these issues, and I really care about these issues in this country, and because I really should care about those things, you wind up with a way of connecting to them that there isn't some question of, okay, what is it about what you believe that tells you why you should care about those things? It's more like you're in an environment where, okay, my formation is telling me this is what's important. And I think to the extent that there is some diminishment of the way that other institutions inform their identity, the political realities are sort of taking up the slack for that.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that piece. But Mike, have you seen the same thing where it seems like the political influence is growing? Is that a trend you see?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for your comments. We lined up on lots of things, and it occurs to me, you can do my job better than I can do your job. So you can sort of play the role of a pastor, then I'm going to be able to play the role of a political scientist. But here goes. I think I would just affirm what Vince just said with some different words. So when I think, is politics become more significant in people's lives? Or people's identity more political than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago? I think the answer to that is yes, and I think that there's a variety of reasons. So a number of years ago, I went back and reread a book that I had read in the 80s. Charles Malik wrote a book called The Christian Critique of the University, and he had his 7 institutions that he said, these institutions govern our life, and it's the family, it's the church or synagogue, it's the state, it's business, it's the professions, it's the arts. I'm leaving one out, maybe But he said those institutions are the most important. Oh, it's a university. Those institutions are the most important. And then he said the university is the most important because it shapes the leaders of all the others. And then he said, so the question of what does Jesus think of the university is the most important question of all time. So when I was a college pastor, I used to quote this book and say, you know, the university is so important. We got to figure out how to shape the university and shape the curriculum and all those things. When I reread the book 5 or 10 years ago, I thought, so in the last 30 years, I think that the family has gone down and the church has gone down and the state has gone up in terms of influence and power and shaping things. And to some extent, I think business has gone up. The university is here or there. Business, I think business has gone up in terms of the impact that comically almost. I mean, people now talk about CEOs like they used to talk about quarterbacks when I was growing up. Who I couldn't have named, when I was 10 or 15 or probably 20, I couldn't have named one Fortune 500 CEO. And now it's Bezos and Musk. I mean, people know all these names, Gates and Jobs. I mean, these are sort of important, influential people. The point is, the influence, when the influence of the family went down, when the influence of the church went down, when my identity in Christ became less rigorously shaped, then politics steps into the gap. And the state steps into the gap. There are needs, the state expands into that gap. And so, and then I think social media has contributed to isolation and malformation of people, and it's catered to fear and anxiety, and those algorithms, I think, are shaping us more than we understand. So I think I agree. Our identity in Christ has gone down, and so I think our political identity has gone up.
So a follow-up to that, what happens in someone's life when, as you said, when politics becomes a first-order issue, when it moves to the primary allegiance? How does that impact me, or maybe how does that impact a group of people who would fit that categorization? What do you see as the effects of that?
I think it depends on the person, honestly, but I think people feel like, and I think this is part of the thing, they feel like there's going to be something about their life that's going to be better if their team, so to speak, is going to have its fortunes, move forward politically. And particularly if there are fears that they have about what's going to happen with the possibilities of their life, then they're more nervous about what will happen if their team loses. In other words, because the politics becomes more important than the fact that they believe in the resurrection. There's amnesia about the resurrection, or at least temporary amnesia about the resurrection. And instead, it's what's going to who's going to be in office and what's that going to mean. And I do think there's a sort of it's not really only happening in the United States, but I think one of the ways that it's distinctive in the United States is that, we're a superpower. And there's a certain way that you can think about what it means to be part of this superpower and what you imagine it to be. And if a certain group is going to help you to be closer to that, or you fear that another group is going to take you away from that, then that's going to intensify the tension within you when you're thinking about that.
Mike, thoughts on that one? The impact it has?
I love, and I'm sort of a broken record on this, but I loved your second point. For your first point, that our allegiance needs to be to God first. Anything can become an idol. We've got to keep God in God's place. But also being people of hope, who just keep going back to saying, nothing in heaven will change on November 9th. The election's the 8th. We wake up on the 9th. Nothing in heaven has changed. Everything that ultimately matters is still secure in Christ, and an empty tomb and a risen Savior. And so
All right. One of the other things you mentioned, I was trying to scratch this down pretty quickly, but you talked about permission to engage. So you did say yes. One of my questions was along those lines. So you've already answered that one. Yes, we do as Christians not only have permission, but maybe even obligation. Is that a fair word? Stewardship. Maybe that's a. Okay, stewardship would be at least a strong word to say. So who is doing this well? If you're looking at examples of people who are out there who are taking your advice, listening, reading the Political Disciple, right? They have a theology for public life. Are there folks who are out there, and Mike, are there people you're looking to say, yeah, I think this person or this group or this individual is navigating these things well? Do either one of you have folks we can look to?
I mean, you've got the book Compassion and Conviction over there. I think the AND campaign's a great example of that. Justin Giboney's a great example of that. Michael Weir's a great example of that. I was on the board for the Center for Public Justice for 6 years. I'm a fellow for the center. I think the center's a great example of that. So there's some, I think even though apparently he's migrating out of politics now, I think someone like Ben Sass would be a great example of that. We had an event where he and former Governor Bill Haslam of Tennessee, Amy Black and I interviewed them. I think both of them good examples of really trying to do that well.
Okay. Yeah, great.
So the example that I consistently use when I'm asked, who would you vote for? What are you looking at? What do you like? I go back to Wilberforce. I say, here's a politician who is shaped. Here's a guy who's in Parliament. He dedicates his life. He stays engaged. He wants to get out. When he comes to faith, late 18th, early 19th century, when he comes to faith, he wants to get out of politics, and he's coached to stay in. And he dedicates his life to fighting slavery and eradicating slavery, first in the British Empire, and then more broadly than that. And he's profoundly shaped by his Christian convictions, but he's playing within the system, and he's a smart, long-term player. He understands the political field, and he ultimately prevails in what he sets out to do.
Is he on the ballot coming up soon, Mike?
I've written him in from time to time.
Every once in a while, if you don't know who to vote for, just write in Wilberforce. There you go. So people who have tried to do this in the past, at least in American history, have wound up, it seems like when they try to do faith and politics, a lot of times they only get the politics side, or at least that's the accusation against them. I know on either side, whether it's people will accuse the moral majority of doing this, they'll accuse social gospel of sort of buying into liberation theology and sort of losing sort of the core to this. So if you try faith and politics, you always end up in a ditch, one side or the other. At least that's an accusation. How do you help people avoid either one of those ditches?
The kingdom. You're not. Two, you're not in a totalitarian enterprise. You're not, one, like I said, you don't see all that clearly yourself. So however you're doing it, you should do it with humility, and your aspirations ought to be modest. Because you can't bring in the kingdom. And we've seen people when they try to have this kind of hard-charging optimism, a lot of times, what do we get? We get another example of something that was either scandalous or just misguided. And the fact is that we're in a pluralistic society. We're in a world where not everybody is a Christian, and where people believe lots of other things. So unless you're trying to have a totalitarian enterprise where you are going to force everyone to see things exactly as you do, you know that whatever you do, you're going to be trying to get some kind of penultimate good, in conversation with people that don't agree with you, that may have fundamentally different worldviews from you. And so you're in this constant negotiation. And so I think you have to be thinking about the fact you're going to be in a constant negotiation rather than promising people, if you elect me, I'll set you free. Well, it just hasn't happened. Nobody's done it. So I think there needs to be a properly modest aspiration about what you're going to be accomplishing politically, because you work with other people.
And do those women, do those men who say that, do they ever win an election? Because it seems like the way to win an election is to promise the world.
I would say there have been people like that who've done that. I was on a panel last week, Russell Moore was on the panel, and he said, there are people, he gets calls from people that got in Congress because they want to be public servants. And they're talking about all the increasing number of people that the reason they got into politics is basically building their brand, getting attention, and it's how you build a public image. It's how you look at what I am, right? So it may be a way of getting power of a sort, getting attention. They're not necessarily thinking about being public servants. They're thinking about being people that are kind of like a political celebrity for people. Now, I mean, it's not new that there have been people who wanted to be that way, but I think you do have a greater number of people who want to be that way. My encouragement to people, if they're thinking about politics, is start local. Look around locally, and see, and maybe look at one thing that you can really care about, and think about how do I understand what's really going on here with public policy, and what is some improvement that we can make about this.
So Yuval Levin's book, I can't think of the name of it now, but he just spoke about how many people are now using institutions, as opposed to an institution being a shaping organization, the Marines or IBM or Congress, shaping behavior. People just they just leverage whatever institution they can get to be their own brand on top of it. And they don't care about the hard work of that institution and being shaped and formed by that institution and being a public servant. Yes, I'm here to do the non-sexy work that happens on CNN. Right? Nobody... C-SPAN,
yeah.
Yes, C-SPAN.
CNN's a whole other game.
They want to be on CNN, yes.
With persuasion, other channels.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, that distinction between an institution that is formational or someone using it as, I guess you can't say, when you're performing, it's not, how do you use that in that? Can't use the word the right way, but instead
Performative?
Formative, there we go.
Performative,
Formative or
yes.
performative.
Yeah.
That's the distinction.
And tragically, I mean, I'll just have to own up that a lot of people, there are people in ministry that use the church as an institution from which to launch their brand. You go, no, this is going to be around, this ought to shape you, you don't shape it. And we need stronger institutions than we have right now.
And I do think we can't miss the fact that there's something about celebrity culture that mesmerizes people. And also now, of course, with social media, if you do it right, you can be the next, star.
Yeah.
Right.
The next
and I think
influencer.
that's really that there's an allure that has for people.
I would add to the institutions that people have hijacked the news. Mm-hmm. So we've got all these celebrity news readers, I don't want to say actors, I don't know what the right word is, but journalists. And they are bigger than their institution, and it's a whole lot more opinion than it is reporting. And I think that also foments some of the challenges that we have downstream.
So one of the other, back to the falling off on the ditch on either side, Mike, one of the accusations against the church is that church and state should be separated, right? So there's a wall of separation, maybe there's some misunderstanding around this, and that a church like this, maybe we're going to lose our tax-exempt status tonight because we're hosting an event that's talking about politics. Yeah. Help us understand what's at stake there. And
I've been at a church where the pastor handed out a ballot and said, I can't hand out this ballot. No, you didn't hand out a ballot, although I've been in those where the ballots will be available next week. You can pick up your ballot. I filled it in for you. You just sign it. I was at a church and there was a referendum coming up, and they said, so the big referendum, you got to vote tomorrow. The choices are yes and no. I can't tell you how to vote, but the right answer has 2 letters and it starts with an N, and if you need more coaching, see me after the service. So the separation of church and state, first of all, not in the Constitution, right? This is like it's in a letter that Jefferson writes to a Baptist group, right? The Danbury Baptist Association or something, 10 years after the Constitution. And it's been misunderstood and changed, and our laws are a little bit fluid, and so the understanding of that has changed. But the big issue, we have this we have this exemption clause. What's the establishment clause? So there can be no establishment of a church, of a congregation. So the English, you got the Church of England, right, which is sort of a somewhat state-mandated group, and pastors can get money from the state. And the Germans had the Lutheran Church, and all these people are fleeing the state church. And when we get here, they said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to establish one and preference one denomination, one faith, one church. And so that's what's going on. This, just for the record, I don't know how many people know this, this is not technically a sanctuary. This is technically a meeting house. Now, I've heard two different things. So this is the Puritan architecture. I've heard two different things, and I've heard both things from lots of different people. But Puritan architecture, and the Puritans were very reformed in their thinking, and part of what they would build is a place for the community to gather for meetings. And it could be a school meeting, it could be a civic meeting, it could be a church meeting, it could be an educational meeting. They were building a meeting house. Now, the other thing, so all of that would say there's no separation here of church and state in that sense.
So if someone's on the school board, we want to have a meeting here next. Is that
Well, we'll let the campus pastor figure that out, yeah. Now, I've also heard the reason that this is called a meeting house is because the Anglicans and the Puritans were sort of trying to reform the Anglicans and you know, coming out of the English Reformation and all that. But the Anglicans looked at the Puritans' architecture and they didn't see any kind of sacred, you know, furniture and other things. And they said, well, it's not a church. You can call it whatever you want to call it. They go, well, it is where we meet for church. We go, fine, we'll call it a meeting house. So whatever the genesis of that, I haven't been able to figure out which came first. But this is, in one sense, a meeting house because we believe very much in the reformed idea, Jesus is Lord of not just the church, but of the classroom and the boardroom and the courtroom. We want Christians to think under the sovereign leadership of Christ and everything. So, are we going to lose our tax-exempt status? No, we're not going to lose our tax-exempt status. Now, I don't take partisan positions. I argue what I try to consider more pre-political, pre-partisan positions is what I try to advocate. And every year before presidential election, I've been here 22 years, I have given a sermon in the summer before the presidential election and said, I just want to remind you, you know, Romans 13 and other things, how we think about this, what we understand the role of the government to be. It's a God-ordained institution. What we understand the role of the church to be, what we understand the role of Christians to be. And again, as you mentioned, America in the 21st century is radically different than if we were living in Myanmar today, or if we were living in Tibet in the 13th century, or in the Roman Empire. I mean, this is complicated stuff.
That's a great transition to the next.
Yeah,
jump in, please.
We don't have an official United States denomination. We have religious pluralism. I mean, that's the whole point of the Establishment Clause, that we don't have the Church of the United States of America. And so, because we don't, that's the point. So the government isn't favoring any particular denomination or group. It doesn't mean that you can't worship, that you can't have conversations among the people that worship. I think people hear separation of church and state, and they don't really ask what it means. It's very convenient particularly if you're fond of the secularization thesis, and you think, let's just keep religion in the closet. And it's a way to kind of just tell people, stay in the closet with that religious stuff. I'll bring all of my philosophy to the public. You can't bring anything that's formative for you to the public. It sounds, the way it sounds to people is not what it is.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. So next, I'm going to go, so Bible Times, verse today. So there's no democracy, right, in the New Testament. Mary and Joseph didn't take Jesus to the voting booth. There was not, right, some of those concepts that are true, the reality in which we live in this world. If I understand you right, I just heard you say that just because that's not didn't exist in the New Testament doesn't mean the Bible doesn't speak to it. It does today. But one of the questions that came in from someone in the congregation was, because we're largely in a two-party system, and neither candidate oftentimes represents sort of exactly what I want. I feel morally compromised to sign off on one or the other. And so in that situation, what do I do?
First thing I would say is you think even the person that if the person supposedly represents everything you think that person is some kind of completely sanctified individual that you're going to have voting for?
Wilberforce.
Yeah, well, even he needed to be saved. So the point being that whoever you vote for is a person that's imperfect and that's going to be working with other people. You're not voting for somebody that's going to be a dictator. You're voting for somebody that's going to be working with other people. So whoever it is, they're going to disappoint you. And again, I think sometimes we make these very binary statements as if, of course, when people say that, because you see, every decision I make, I get exercised over it about whether or not it's pure enough. It's like, oh, is that how you shop? Is that how you decide what roads you take, what neighborhoods you go through? And we can just keep going on, right? There are a lot of choices people make where, well, if you're going to think about it that way, you would have a very, very restricted life. But the point is, I don't think that the point of voting in our case is to hem yourself in that way. I do think you try to be as informed as possible, and in some cases you may be voting for the person that will do the least harm. And that may be all you've got, right? Or sometimes you may principally want to vote for another candidate because they are running, and if you don't think that they have the chance of getting elected, but you do want to exercise your right to vote. So I would just say, don't be cornered by the idea that somehow God is pointing a finger at you and saying, I want you to vote for my candidate. Because whoever, even if the person's a Christian, okay, that person is still a Christian that's a sinner, does not have a realized eschatological view of public policy, and that probably also has, in spite of their best intent, interests that they favor that are probably not for good reasons. And even that best person, okay, is going to disappoint you. So you're not voting for someone that will free you from disappointment. We have to dial down our expectation while saying, okay, who might help get some penultimate good done if they're in office, and with the things that concern you the most about public good, who will help you to do that? And but whoever your choices are, sometimes they're just all bad choices. So who's the least bad choice sometimes is the choice you're making.
All right, so I follow up to that, not just with candidates, but with issues. Another question that came in was, is the Bible is it a public policy manual, right? Is that what the Bible is actually trying to do? Or is it just a personal ethics manual? So we sort of understand right and wrong individually, and then we apply that broader. And I'm going to go to both of you on this one, but Dr. Bacote, if you would start, how would you say that relationship between beginning to understand specific issues?
Sure. The Bible certainly is about our personal life, but it's also, as human beings who live in God's world, if we had this first great commission, then there's at least a principled disposition that we should have towards seeking the public good if we're able to be in a context where we can do that. But a lot of that is just principles. I mean, what does the Bible tell us about nuclear warheads? What does it tell us about modern traffic laws? It doesn't tell us anything. So the question then is, are there principles that emerge from Christian commitments or from particular texts that we can discern that help to guide some ideas about policy? But then even with those policies, as I mentioned when I was talking, a lot of our public policies are grand experimental exercises where I'm trying something out to get a particular end. And we just have to keep recognizing that we're it's an experimental enterprise. And I think if we think about it that way, the goal is that if we can get good things to emerge from that, great, but we also know that we have a dim view. Because we might say, oh, this policy would be great, but there might be a host of unintended consequences that come from it. So whatever it is, it has to have this sign on it that says subject to revision and refinement. And so if I'm thinking about that, then the Scripture is at least giving me principles for thinking about where to go in policy. But I wouldn't use the term policy manual. But I also wouldn't say it has nothing to say.
Mike, are there principles or ways you apply this same question?
I think one of the things one of the real wonderful things about our system, at least in its conception, that is informed and shaped by biblical principles, is the idea of the fallenness of people and the need to divide power and checks and balances that they put in. I was listening a while ago to a discussion about the founders and how they viewed democracy, and I am aware that when I say to people that, you don't find this rigorous chapter and verse support for democracy in the New Testament, right? That's not the system of government that they had. But I had a little bit more of a romanticized version of democracy until I listened to the founders talk about their fear that, okay, now we're empowering the electorate, and they're just as broken and fallen and just as likely to run us off a cliff as anyone else, and how to create these checks and balances in all these different ways. So is the Bible a manual for 21st century politics to guide you, not in the way that the marked ballots that get handed out that people want, right? Tell me how to vote. So, but do we get principles that should shape how we think about the common good and our allegiances and the kingdom of God and what that might look like, and how we embrace common grace and how we deal with the depravity of man and all those things? I think we find a lot of coaching there, and we've got to lean into it. And to your point, I do think we can bring our biblical convictions to the public square. I think we need to bring our biblical convictions to the public square. I don't think we can expect the biblical convictions to stand in the public square because they're biblical. I think we're going to have to argue on the basis of reason, because I'm not going to listen to somebody argue on the basis of the Quran or something else that I don't accept. And so it is complicated, but there is certainly, it's the book. Like, I think we got to start there.
Yeah, it's a translation project if you're thinking about people that don't share your worldview. How am I at least translating this so that maybe people, instead of saying this verse says, here's what's coming from that verse that I'm trying to convey to you, and is there a space for agreement or a way to persuade?
Yeah, that's good. All right, some of the phrases that are being thrown around right now in this space, in this conversation, have to do with Christians that are maybe anti-Americans, or Christians who are patriots, or Christians that are Christian nationalists. Can you just give us a little bit give us the terminology? What are the buzzwords we need to know, and what do those words mean?
I would say actual patriotism is proper love for your country, but a proper love for your country that includes, loving your country enough to say you can do things better, right? So you can have loving critique of your country. Nationalism, forms of nationalism, are ways of worshiping the country and making everything serve the ends of the country. For some people, it goes to levels of detail about God maybe inspiring the Constitution, or George Washington being, a Mosaic type of character. And, you already said this, but I'm just going to reiterate this just for everybody. Anyone who thinks that the United States is like the chosen nation must understand that nothing on this side of the Atlantic is mentioned in the Bible. So
God was doing a lot of work.
The only way that we're mentioned in the Bible is either ends of the earth or all the nations. That's it. So now, none of that means America's not a great country, that we don't have a Judeo-Christian background, that people a lot of times want the benefits of a Judeo-Christian background without giving credit to Christians, all that type of stuff. It's all true. But we're a very imperfect Judeo-Christian background. 50 years ago, would I be sitting up here? would I be the speaker and people are actually thinking, nobody's wondering how I managed to get a PhD and whether I'm smart enough or whatever. Well, why? Well, because this Judeo-Christian country, by law, for most of its history, antagonized people who look like me. Right? So none of that means, again, that we're like the worst country ever. It's like other countries, we're imperfect. Judeo-Christian doesn't have to mean perfect. We can say we're a country with great aspirations, and we're still trying to live up to and into those things, but none of that means that we're a chosen nation. And it's really okay.
And Mike, do you feel there are places where people are looking to you or to the church for a version of Christian nationalism when they're trying to sync up the United States and a specific version of Christianity? Are they looking for that from the church?
Sure, read my email. There's American nationalism out there. And I think I consider my job as a pastor in that sense to say, are there things, what does it mean to be patriotic, and are we called to be patriotic, and how should we understand America? And there's many things about America that I think we do need to celebrate. And there's many things, I've had the privilege of traveling to 25 or 30 countries, and I do appreciate the United States and a lot of the things that it's doing. Is it doing it as well as it could? Absolutely not. Should it be worshipped? Absolutely not. Do we have to keep getting better? Absolutely. I asked your colleague, Tracy McKenzie, when I was doing the podcast, he wrote a book called We the Fallen People, which was just looking at how the founders were dealing with the fact that they looked at us, humanity, as being profoundly broken, and they didn't have this elevated view of people on this side of Genesis 3. And I asked him, I said, so talk with me about American exceptionalism. In what ways is America exceptional, and in what ways is it absolutely not? Right? He wouldn't answer the question. He goes, I'm not, yeah, right. I said, okay, are you sure you're not a politician? Because you just dodged the question. So I've wrestled with that. I've been asking people that. I absolutely 100% agree with you. And is America the chosen nation or any of these things? No, there's just nothing to suggest that. Do I think the ideals that informed the United States getting started are unique in a lot of different ways? Yes. Did we live up to them? No. Are we trying to get better? I think so. So I hear that, and I'm just trying to shape people and to shape people's expectations and to say, look, city of God, city of man, this is an ongoing project, an ongoing challenge. Where does my ultimate allegiance lie? It lies in the city of God. I'm defined my ultimate allegiance is to God. But I'm living in the city of man, and I can't discard the fact that I'm a citizen of this world, in this city, and I got to figure out how to live there and be responsible and love my neighbor, and I've got to balance these dual citizenships that I hold on to. And so when I get asked into those questions, ask those questions, or can we vote this way? Can't we do this? Can't you see this? I'm trying to say, step back. Okay, look, I'm not a representative of the state. I'm trying to represent Jesus Christ. I'm trying to point you in that direction. I think you're going to find this is what you want, really. Just hear me out. And there's just all kinds of reasons that you don't want to head down that path.
All right, so we are running out of time rapidly, but shifting gears again, Supreme Court. So the Roe v. Wade decision that was just overturned, just how do you see that changing what's about to happen in 10 days from now at the state level, maybe in Illinois or more broadly, but then backing out in a couple years from now, that largely for a significant part of the evangelical community, it has been a primary talking point for who to vote for and how to put people on the court and things like that. So talk to us a little bit about the implications of what just happened.
I think one thing, at least I saw people that I'm pretty sure are pro-life who weren't happy about the Dobbs decision. I saw a lot of people who were, but I was surprised at some people who were not happy at all. And that could have been because they don't want certain people to get credit for it, or they think that it's part of a larger package of rolling back certain things, right? So I think that could be part of what that concern is. I think in terms of the election, we'll see how much of a factor it is. We'll see. I mean, it's certainly a talking point, but we'll see how much of a difference that makes in terms of whether there's some more Democrats that win rather than lose ultimately, right? I think in terms of, however people are going to vote, that's just one thing among others. And to me, the question is, look around at the world and look around at our society, and what are all, if you're pro-life, what are the ways that life is being antagonized? Not just in the womb, but everywhere else. And what are your concerns about the ways that life is being antagonized, where people's flourishing is being thwarted or compromised by something? And a lot of these are very complicated things, but those issues aren't going anywhere. And actually, the Dobbs decision it changed some things. In some ways, it just made it more of a open playing field and a fracture in our society. So there's still actually pro-life opportunity in the sense of, I think one of the greatest things that pro-life people can do is to say, we want you to know that when we are talking about unborn children, we care as much about the mother carrying that child as we do about the child themselves. Because a lot of times I think the way that it's played out, talking about the unborn, as if the person carrying the unborn just happens to be, someone that you can forget about after they gave birth to the child. So I'm not saying anybody intends that, but I think the rhetoric can function that way. And I do know of situations where some people of a more activistic pro-life inclination, they're like, don't talk about the mom. Just talk about the child in the womb, because that's how you would sort of leverage it politically, or how you would get more of an affect about the issue. So we have the opportunity remains to be as pro-life in as many ways as possible, and are we trying to do that?
So Mike, coming up in 10 days, are there things you're looking to this election that you think will be, I guess, indicative, or maybe new trends? Are there things you're looking or tracking that you think, one way or the other, that are at stake in the next few weeks?
I would just say, from what I understand, in the midterms, the party in power always loses seats. I expect this will largely just be, some of that will happen, sort of politics as usual. I guess the thing that I'm as interested in is what happens on November 9th as November 8th. I'm just hoping that there's just that the level of rhetoric and the other things, just the people of goodwill and level-headed and love and other things will, however this turns out. And I do think, again, broken record, but I do think one of the things as Christians that we have the opportunity to do in this increasingly antagonistic, angry moment with lots of anxiety and vitriol is to be the non-anxious presence, to say, I have deep convictions about things. I care about, how some of these things happen, but I care about you, and I'm not panicking. And the kingdom of God is not coming, as Colson famously said, the kingdom of God is not arriving on Air Force One. It's just not the way it's going to happen. So to be that person of calm, that's got a longer term view, and that doesn't mean we withdraw. Not that. Sherry and I already voted. We got mail-in ballots. We could talk about that. We got mail-in ballots, filled them out, spent time together talking about this, looking at things, praying about this. Okay, here, we're going to fill this out. I want people involved, but I just want politics to be politics, and I want following Jesus to be bigger than that.
All right. So we start a few minutes late, so this will be the last question here. And Mike, I'll start with you, and Dr. Bacote, give you the last word here. One of the things you did in the sermon this morning, we're in the middle of a series on why God cares about the work we do. We were looking at the theme of justice this morning and the way that shows up in society. And politics is one of those places where justice oftentimes is decided, or there's significant influence. So maybe somebody is here serving in a role as a public servant. They're in a political position, or maybe somebody here aspires to do that. God bless you as you do that. what advice or what word would you have, Mike, we'll start with you, to someone who may be thinking along those lines, who wants to step up and raise their hand and step into a role like that?
Please do. So yesterday I ran in the pumpkin chase run in Lake Bluff. I ran for the 22nd time or whatever. And it was it was a civic event. Rich Martin, I don't know if Rich is here tonight. I can't see a thing. I'm just looking into the lights. So Rich Martin has led this. The money goes to the school board, and it has forever. And every year I write Rich a note and I go, God bless you, Rich, like doing this activity of community involvement, of civic engagement, people serving on the parks board and school board and all these things. This is so incredibly important, and to serve well and to love your neighbor and to listen and to be a thoughtful advocate for what you care about. In the same way that I said a few weeks ago, look, turn down the news, and especially the national and international news about which you can do nothing. For the most part, we hear stories, they get us mad, we can do nothing about it. I think we need more, and I said, we need more local news, where you actually, and if you know the name of all these leaders in Europe and you don't know the name of your neighbors, right, that doesn't work. So I would say to people who are thinking about politics, local, and yes, please do it. I think those things are very important. And I, in the last 4 or 5 years, have come to understand and appreciate civic engagement as being a much more important thing. Our society, the fabric of society is not as strong as it used to be. And we need people that are doing the behind the scenes, not very exciting things on an ongoing basis. And people who love others and are trying to follow God, all the better.
I'll just reiterate that and say, yes, it's true that if you wanted to run in either party at a certain level, and if you're a Christian, it's probably hard to be the person the party's going to choose because of what is tending to get the attention and the kind of candidates that people want to put out. But you have to think about it as a long game. And of course, but not the ultimate game, right? Again, it's a way of trying to help serve others. And again, it's the unique opportunity to help serve others in the kind of system that we have. And so I would say prayerfully discern how to do it, but make sure you also have a lot of people around you to support you, because there are a lot of people who, when they get amid other people that are about the work of politics, are thinking, so all these people care about is power or getting reelected, and they don't really care that much about their constituencies. They care about, having, posters with their faces on them, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, it's called sinful human beings. We shouldn't be surprised. We should be surprised that sin is there, but it's not only there. So, and the thing is that if you tell people to check out, please don't complain when everybody else has policies that you don't like, because you told people to check out. So if people want to get in, then they need support around them to be with them, particularly to perhaps to coach them up sometimes and to encourage them when they are dealing with the fact that it's hard work, but also it can be very discouraging at times. And so, yes, but don't do it as a lone ranger. You need a cohort of people around you to walk with you, to support you.
All right, thank you. There's lots of people that can be engaged in the game. Engaged, not disengaged. And I think you said transformational, but not triumphalistic.
Correct.
In their approach to doing that. So if you would, please join me again in thanking Dr. Bacote and Mike.